Look at the scale of destruction in modern European trench warfare. A massive conventional war is raging directly on the border of a nuclear superpower. In February 2022, Vladimir Putin issued a direct threat against Western interference, warning of consequences never seen in history. This map shows the expanding concentric strike radii of Western munitions. Today, those weapons are striking targets deep inside Russian territory. Despite these repeated breaches of stated red lines, actual nuclear deployment, acute vertical escalation, remains absent. Escalation here is not governed by formal treaties. It is regulated by an active shadow framework of calculated rhetoric and incremental military steps. Since February 2022, formal diplomatic channels between Washington and Moscow have largely collapsed. This forces both sides to rely on discursive signaling. Instead of direct negotiations at a table, the states engage in tacit bargaining. Physical battlefield movements and public rhetoric act as substitutes for diplomacy. To decode these signals, we have to apply mid-century deterrence theories to the noise and data of the current war. Understanding these theoretical frameworks reveals the exact mechanisms keeping a controlled proxy war from becoming a nuclear catastrophe. During the Cold War, the strategic theorist Alexander George identified a primary mechanism for deterrence. He called it the basic rule of prudence. This rule dictates the absolute avoidance of a direct armed clash between the uniformed personnel of rival nuclear superpowers. Today, adherence to this tacit rule is the primary barrier preventing the proxy conflict in Ukraine from expanding into a general European war. The boundary faced a stress test in early 2024 when French President Emmanuel Macron publicly suggested that deploying Western troops to the combat zone could not be ruled out. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and other NATO heavyweights immediately and aggressively disavowed Macron's comments. Officials in the United States and the United Kingdom simultaneously rejected the deployment of military trainers or ground troops. The rapid suppression of the troops debate by the alliance proves that the rule of prudence remains the absolute bedrock threshold of Western policy. On the other side, Russia employs a strategy first articulated by Thomas Schelling, the threat that leaves something to chance. This curve visualizes the manipulation of risk. By introducing strategic uncertainty through aggressive rhetoric, a state raises the perceived danger of an accident. Russia applied this logic directly when it updated its nuclear doctrine to include responses to conventional attacks. To reinforce these verbal threats, the Russian military executes physical displays as nonverbal discursive signals. In November 2024, Russia launched the Oreshnik, an experimental ballistic missile, into the city of Dnipro. It carried a conventional payload, proving a delivery capability without crossing the actual nuclear threshold. The objective is not immediate nuclear use. The goal is to weaponize the possibility of an unpredictable escalation, forcing Western allies into self-restraint out of caution. The Western counter-strategy to this brinkmanship is a process called salami slicing. This diagram illustrates the concept: the slow erosion of an adversary's red lines through discrete, incremental steps to avoid massive reprisal. The first major test occurred when the West provided HIMARS, a rocket launcher that extended Ukraine's strike range. The next major slice involved the provision and authorization of ATACMS for deep strikes. ATACMS stands for the Army Tactical Missile System, a surface-to-surface missile with a range of up to 300 kilometers. The final capability upgrade integrated F-16 fighter jets into the Ukrainian Air Force. The Biden administration operated on a precise calculus: test a boundary, observe the Russian response, verify the lack of vertical escalation, and prepare the next upgrade. This incrementalism exposed the bluff of Russian nuclear signaling. However, the slow pace of deliveries forced Ukraine to fight a prolonged war of attrition. Traditional deterrence focuses on intentional state actions. It contains a critical blind spot: inadvertent escalation caused by the collapse of civilian nuclear infrastructure. The most immediate risk of nuclear disaster is at the ZNPP, the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, driven by systemic electrical grid failures. In March 2026, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which monitors global nuclear safety, reported that Ukraine endured 21 waves of air attacks on its electrical substations over a 5-month period. This schematic illustrates the engineering danger. Without off-site grid power, nuclear plants lose their primary cooling and monitoring systems. Since the conflict began, the facility has lost 12 major power lines. This forces the reactors to rely entirely on temporary emergency diesel generators. The conventional destruction of electrical substations strips away the plant's design safety margins. It creates a severe nuclear risk that military deterrence theories cannot solve. The conflict presents two distinct vectors of nuclear risk: the intentional, weaponized brinkmanship of the Russian state and the inadvertent degradation of physical infrastructure. Western powers have managed the intentional intimidation. They rely on strict adherence to the rule of prudence and slow, calculated incrementalism. That stability requires a shared, rational understanding of risk signals between Washington and Moscow. That political rationality stands in sharp contrast to the chaotic physical reality of Ukraine's energy grid. Thomas Schelling warned about the probability of a catastrophic accident. Today, that chance is growing, not because of deliberate military strategy, but because of structural grid collapse. State-level deterrence is holding, but the nuclear safety of Europe depends on a thread that is systematically being dismantled on the battlefield.